Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might be in this fine world. You're listening to the Startup Selling Show, talking sales with ambiguity. That's me. Today's episode is a guest episode, and today's guest is Zach Stein. Zach is formerly the co-founder of a company called Osmo Systems. And I just stress the word formerly because this is a very new development in his journey as an entrepreneur. And that's exactly why I asked Zach if he would come on today's show. Obviously, of course, we talk about sales and selling and startups, all of the sort of growth-related topics, so everything from LinkedIn to lead gen to pipeline to pricing, all that kind of stuff in the show. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. Today's episode is about Zach's journey as an entrepreneur from the time that he and I first met years ago when he was just joining a hardware accelerator program at Highway1, and I was a mentor. I met him for a quick 30, 45-minute sales mentoring session, all the way through to the time where we worked together and helping him grow sales, and now to the point where, because of some very, very difficult technical hurdles, he and his co-founder have made the very difficult decision to wind down the project, wind down operations at Osmo Systems, and move in a totally new direction. And so Zach and I spoke last week on the phone where he shared that news with me, and in that conversation, I'd asked him like straight up, I was like, look, man, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know. And a day later, I then asked him on quick message, I said, listen, Zach, I know this is all new, but one of the things that's always impressed me about you as an individual and you as a leader is your ability to make decisions. And I know this decision to wind down Osmo Systems was very difficult and also very calculated. And throughout the work that I've done with Zach over the years, from the point of him and I becoming, working together as a client, him joining our program, being a client, to watching some of the decisions he's had to make as a company with some pivots and technical changes and adjustments to how they're approaching the market, all the way through to the point where now he's made this decision to wind down the project and move in a different direction. His ability to make decisions and do so in a very intelligent and thoughtful way has always impressed me. And I asked if he'd be willing to share some of that in a podcast episode, because I think that there's a lot to be learned, and some of his models and frameworks that he used, that he and his co-founder James use to make decisions, I think would be really, really useful to share with everyone that's listening to the show. So that's the tenor of today's conversation. A couple of things that we specifically talked about to listen for as we get started in the conversation in just a moment is, the first thing I asked Zach about was, what drives, when do you know you need to make a decision? And so specifically, Zach talked about the lack of clarity or an increase in ambiguity. That's often the trigger for him, where a decision needs to be made. The second is where he's feeling or seeing a specific weakness in himself or in the organization. And the third is around pain. He's feeling a certain amount of pain around a business operation or a company process. Those are all a signal to him that a decision needs to be made. Secondly, we talked, or not secondly, but another topic we talked about was this process that he calls Name It to Tame It. So it's a psychological process that when you have a fear or you have a situation and you're trying to figure out exactly how to handle it, you're trying to communicate it, one of the things you can do is actually name the problem. And in his company with Osmo, he went into this process that he called In the Woods. And in the woods, that was his phrase, his naming it to tame it, where he and his team went through about a 1-month process to really figure out why they weren't making the progress they needed to make on a technical standpoint with the technology that they were building. So we talked a lot about this concept of name it to tame it, and how he and his co-founder facilitated the decision-making process on how his team was going to be able to move forward after making some adjustments to their technical roadmap. The other thing we talked about is using questions to orient a decision-making process. We talked about creating a clear set of rules, and we used an analogy around playing fields. Talked a bit about kickball versus soccer. I think you'll listen to, enjoy listening to. And then we also talked about a maxim that he and his team hold, which is to say it out loud. Say it out loud, meaning that when you're sharing a concept or sharing an idea with a team member, then to reflect back to what that person has just said to you, and by saying, what I'm hearing you say is, and then reflecting that back. And we dove deep into why that's really important in order to create team understanding and team clarity around what can otherwise be very ambiguous or very undocumented ideas. So the last little bit of the conversation that we talked about, we just got into a conversation around rules and rulemaking, and how having a set of rules around a decision make it much easier to make decisions, and the simplicity of rules allow you to avoid this cascade of decision-making fatigue that can happen when you don't have a clear set of rules. So talked about a lot of topics. This is a very personal conversation for Zach and for me to have. I thought he did an outstanding job of extracting himself out of what is clearly, a very difficult time. But as Zach self-described himself, he is a very genuine, very real, and very hopeful person. And those character traits are what made it possible for him to jump on this podcast interview not more than a week removed from making a decision to wind down Osmo Systems and move in a completely new direction. So very, very grateful for the time with Zach. Very, very grateful to you as a listener for indulging us in taking this little bit of a sidestep from the normal course that we take here in the Startup Selling Show. I do think you're going to enjoy the conversation with Zach Stein, so let's head over there right now. Thanks for listening. So I want to set the stage a little bit here. I'm going to do a little bit of talking just for the listening audience to help people get some more context as to why we're talking, and then I'll turn the talking stick over to you for a little bit. So I was doing some digging, and I found 3 specific emails that relate to you and me, and I wanted to share those emails because I think it sort of tells a little bit of the story, and then we can get into exactly why we're having you on the show. Are you cool with that?
I'm cool with that.
Sure. Okay. So email number 1 is from Highway1, which is the hardware accelerator that you were a part of back in spring of 2017.
Yep.
And so in that email is a list of different companies that are in your cohort. One of them was Osmo Systems. And there's a little write-up here. Osmo Systems makes monitoring systems that track water, air, and light quality online for aquaculture, aquaponic, and hydroponic systems. And then there's a little bit more about your hardware product. So that was the very first time that I had even heard of Osmo Systems. So that was number 1 email. Second email is from April 6, 2017. And it's an email from me to you. It says, hey, Zach, we're set for the Highway1 office hours at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. To help us get the most of the time, let's jump on a short call beforehand for 15 minutes so I can learn about where you are and what you need from me regarding sales help. See below, click on a time that works for you. That's email number 2. Email number 3.
I know you are already teaching me about enterprise sales.
Yeah, that's the best way to teach, is people not know that they're getting taught. And so now we're gonna jump in the time machine and fast forward from April 6, 2017 to December 8th, 2019. So just yesterday at the time of our conversation. And it's an email from you to me. It says, hello, thank you very much for your interest in OsmoBot. It is with sadness that I am writing to tell you we're winding down the project and will not be moving forward. While we made some great advances in our novel technology, we could not move quickly enough, and as such, we're not able to raise the additional funding needed to finish R&D and scale production. Thank you for support, and we are sorry not to be able to deliver upon it. Please let me know and any other questions. Please let me know and any other questions you may have. Best of luck. Thank you again, Zach. And I could tell the look in your eye. That was a hard email to write.
That was a hard email to write. I did the inverse of sales techniques and purposefully sent it on a Sunday because I wanted to get a low response because it went out to hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah, maybe nobody will see it if it's on a Sunday.
Or they'll see it, but they won't respond to it, so I'll just have less to follow up on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's fewer. It's like, oh, it's just another marketing email from those people over at Osmo Systems. So we can safely ignore that one and just get on with our day. And so I know there's a story here. We can get to that in a minute. And the real reason is not to sit here and talk about what happened and why did you make this decision. The real reason I wanted to have you on the show is because I have been always impressed by your ability to make decisions. And I've always found you to be very clear and concise and been able to make decisions with clarity and do so, I think, in a meaningful way. And I'd love to talk about a couple of examples as we go through our conversation, but maybe to give you a chance to chat a little bit, maybe you could sort of fill people in just a little bit about where you are with the company and what's next for you. And then we can dig into the kind of analysis I'd love to do about your decision-making processes. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's perfect. Would love to talk about that. It's an area that we gave a lot of attention because we weren't very good at it in terms of making decisions. So we had to stop thinking like we knew what we were doing and send ourselves back to school a bit. So happy to share what we've learned more on that a little bit later. So our background, you read the intro email. We were a seed stage startup. We raised around $3.5 million, led by top VCs. And our goal was to build a new kind of automated monitoring system for aquaculture. Half of the seafood we eat is farmed, and that number needs to go up if we're to avoid complete overfishing of our oceans. Despite that, seafood farming is like very under-technified and thus is very inefficient. And so we were working on a really cool, novel sensing system to be able to bring those farming systems online, monitoring in real time at a cost and ease of use that doesn't exist today. So we were doing that. We were making progress, having setbacks. We were very much a company in R&D. And over the past few months, we knew we had two big hills to climb. One was on the funding side. We needed to raise a seed extension. And then the other was on our research and development. We were, with our latest prototypes, doing a big field testing push. And the unfortunate thing, which we're on the other side of, is neither went well, not as expected. And so we made the decision, which is, we could talk about more of how we made this decision because it was a big one, but to let our team go. So we're paying our team, this is in early December, we're paying them through the end of the year. We let them know. So we tried to give a severance that felt fair. Let them go and have James and I, my co-founder and myself, use our remaining cash to try a new idea, which we'd had a little bit on the back of our minds for a while. And so saw this as an opportunity of let's create the best out of a difficult situation, which led us to where we are today. So right now I'm sitting in our office. This is our last month in it. It's like selling stuff on Craigslist. All emails have been sent. You got the big mass one. So, lots of emails with not our mass email list before that. So a lot of the closing down stuff is almost done. So that feels nice to be almost done with that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot that I want to unpack. One of the things that I think is maybe a little bit hidden in what you just shared that I do want to talk about is that you said that you've got some cash left over. And I know when we spoke last week, you mentioned how you had shared with one of your existing investors, which is a very high profile VC in the Valley, about this new idea, which is not at all related to aquaculture. And yet I know there was some trepidation sharing that idea with the VC, and yet that person was very supportive of you. And I think that is an end result that, given, even though Osmo couldn't work out, that you've got the support of your investor and you were able to make this decision to move away from Osmo Systems with enough cash in the bank that you've given yourself some runway. And I think that's an example of being able to make a decision and go with that decision and be rewarded for doing that, plus be rewarded for having the right relationship with your investors. And so I'm curious if you can just maybe talk about why you feel like your investor was willing to back you and your co-founder, James, in this new direction.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard for me to share generally on that because I have an N of one. This is my first company. So it's not like I've done this a bunch of times before. And I'm like,
that's okay.
We were very fortunate. In our seed round, I pitched to over 80 firms. It was really a whirlwind. And we're very unfortunate with the partners that we made. And our lead investor has told this to me before and told this to me with this is that, it's betting on us. Fundamentally, which I think, again, N of one, so take it with caveats, but if I'm a seed stage investor, that is fundamentally what you're doing, is you're betting on the people, and that it's a relationship that hopefully is going to span a professional lifetime. And so, yeah, that's what, he said in doing this, it's partners for life. And luckily he also thinks it's like actually a good idea. He's not going to bullshit us. We'll give very active feedback in that. So I felt very fortunate and supported with that. And it's actually with pretty much all of our investors, I've gotten a surprising level of support. I mean, what we're going to try might actually be a pretty good idea. It could be achievable. So I've, worked hard to kind of maintain my relationships with our investors and striking that balance of being genuine and real, and also hopeful. There's a lot of overlap between enterprise sales and fundraising and investor relations, I find. And if anything, I get the feedback that I am too honest and a little bit too direct. But maybe that's just kind of my brand and why I've had some success in building those relationships. We'll see where this next project goes, but that's actually been very gratifying on that investor front. And it was not a decision that happened overnight. There was, in making this pivot, it was about a month long of conversations and exploring different options, looking for potential acquisition partners, kind of doing our own due diligence in that decision-making process as a group. Kind of putting everything on the table with where we were at.
Well, I do want to dig into that decision-making process that you just mentioned, because I've observed this in you even before we started working together. We had that sales mentoring session way back when you were in Highway1, and even then, like coming out of that mentoring session, there's frequently, teams that I do some mentoring with, they'll ask like, okay, how do we work together? How can you coach me beyond this mentoring session? And I remember that you were noticeably silent about asking for like that sort of like, hey, can you help me from here? It was sort of like, okay, well, it was, a good session. Seems like a good guy, smart dude, good technology. I wish him well. And so I didn't know this at the time. That was you being decisive, in that you knew you weren't yet ready for sales coaching because your product just wasn't at that place where you could go out and sell. But then we fast forward to January 2018, which is about 8 months from that initial conversation, and you were on my marketing list, and we hadn't really talked at all or communicated. But then you showed up to a workshop that I taught, an all-day workshop, and I do remember this like clear as day, when we took a break from the workshop. And people usually ask me at these workshops like, okay, how could I work with you? What's your coaching program look like? And you were one of the people that asked about that. And I kind of went through it, and I was like, okay, who here is good, is in a position to get started? And like your hand went up like immediately. You're like, I'm ready. And so I was like, wow, that's like super decisive. Because a lot of teams are like, I don't know, let me think about it, I'll get back to you. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't end up joining the program. And when they don't, usually it's a good sign, because they probably wouldn't have done well anyway. But I watched that sort of like decision making in action in those two places. And then the last thing I'll mention is that I know in between all that, you had to take a moment about a year or so ago where you realized that sales were not, like, the product was not moving in the right direction, and you actually had to wind down the size of the team, just focus on engineering, let some people go, bring some new people on, which also took, it was hard, right? It was a lot of data and decision making went into that. So like, what is this process that you follow when it comes to making decisions that you feel like enables you to go decisively in a certain direction, where a lot of people would just sort of hedge or hem and haw or kind of do stuff, but not really?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. A few things came up. One, I think it's just my personality type, which might not be that useful of an answer, but I get the most stressed out when I have a problem without a solution. The solution could be really hard to execute and painful to execute, but I'm so much happier if we're in a one direction or the other. In terms of a path to go, existing in the middle is like nails on a chalkboard. Don't sleep. So I'm always just like kind of clawing at getting it to that point. So I think that there's a little bit just in how I'm wired. I think in the things that the examples that you identified, so which were me deciding to join the program, which to me was me, realizing like I don't know what I'm doing with enterprise sales. I've never done this before. So let me get help. And then two, in going through that transition of realizing that we weren't where we thought we were, I think both of those were just driven by pain. I think that you might have seen some of the good decision-making we've done, but I think we actually did a lot of bad decision-making by getting ahead of ourselves. I think this is especially true on hiring in what we did. I think we, as a company that was in R&D, I think we, in a lot of ways, failed to make proper decision-making by not admitting to ourselves that we were really, truly in R&D, and instead consistently thinking like we're just around the corner and we're going to leave it. And so we were making decisions based upon that base assumption, which we never really explored, or we got better at exploring it, but we weren't great at it. And I think that we ended up wasting a lot of money and resources and time and learned a lot from it. So I think like that second example of realizing that the product wasn't where we thought it was, and we had made these hires in error. It's hard to go back and rewrite history, but I think that initial error was poor decision making, and we were having to kind of clean it up and pay the price for it, and learn that the hard way. I think in joining you and having that decisiveness, it was I had cash, so that was also part of it, of just feeling when we initially talked, I was very conscious of just what services we could afford at that time and what was priority. And so that some way kind of narrowed the scope of decision making. But then when we did join, it was that, and then also starting to try out, it was pain. It was in the same way. I was talking to farmers and just being like, feeling very stressed about it, kind of in that place of like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have an either or an or in terms of a direction I'm going. I don't have a system. And that's really having trouble sitting with that. And so I think that was very motivating for me, and having that decisiveness of being able to say, like, I have the resources, I have the approval from my board to do this. I know I want this. I did shop around, actually. You were one of two sales coaches. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah. That I talked to at that time, and ended up going with you. Turns out you're pretty good at sales. Ended up, I also like very worth it, to be clear. So I ended up going with you because we kind of had identified that was a weakness. So if I, kind of going back in terms of decision making, I think one of the things we learned from that, and this is something that we're very much going to take a lesson on hiring in our next startup, which is, at least until you really have your feet underneath you and have like a good revenue flow and things like that, like hire from pain. Like you are actively doing something where you are like, this is taking up a huge amount of my time. I am not actually working on the business. I'm in the business. It is, somehow revenue generating. It can be given out, and then invest very heavily in that hiring process. But rather than thinking like, well, maybe in next quarter we might want to have this, and it kind of, at least what we found in that early stage, that type of projection often led us down the wrong path, especially as an early stage startup for founders, where it's like we've never done this before. We felt an onus to need to hire quickly. It was a way, especially with that revenue, that we could demonstrate progress to our investors and things like that by having a team that's growing in size. We just made some wrong hires because of that. And it's unfortunate for the people we hired, and unfortunate for us and our bank account. And we could have used that time otherwise well.
So you mentioned a couple of words like hiring for pain, find weakness, spots where you feel like some sense of weakness. And then you also mentioned that your decision-making is based on driving, like reducing ambiguity, right? So those three things are kind of signals like, okay, if I'm feeling weak in an area, I'm feeling like there's not good ambiguity, and I'm feeling some pain, then that's a place to go ahead and create a decision. The decision needs to be made in order to move things in a forward direction or a different direction. Is that kind of a fair summary of what you just said?
Definitely.
Okay. So then if we look at this intermediate step, so from the time that we just talked about, us working together and starting that work, and then the place where you are now, where you've moved in this new direction, I briefly mentioned there was a period of time in between where you had to make some decisions around team, you had to make some decisions around the tech and the platform that you were building. And there was a point there where you, if I remember correctly, you had told me at the time, like, look, if we continue down this one direction with the technology, we're probably not going to be able to get to where we want to go with the outcomes that we want to drive around aquaculture and the impact that we want to make in the market. Or we could sort of backtrack a little bit, get rid of some team, bring in some new people, move in a new direction, not necessarily pivot, but just like retract a bit from what was built and then move in this new direction, which is obviously going to be painful and going to cost you some time. What was that decision like for you? Like, how did you identify that you needed to make this decision? Was it around ambiguity? Was it around feeling a sense of weakness? Was it around a certain pain? Was it all of those three?
Definitely. Yeah. All three in different ways. We were getting ready. So this was in the summer of 2018. And we had a customer success person, we had a marketing person, we had an office manager, which was on my team, and then a number of engineers under my co-founder. And we were getting ready to scale. And we were running more side-by-side tests, and we saw some very troubling data with our hardware. And we went into a period of what we called being in the woods, which was actually really helpful by naming it. One of the phrases we like to use, we borrow from psychology, is name it to tame it, which for us, that being in the woods, it was a very stressful time, but it also gave it a period of time of where we're kind of able to, as an entire team and organization, say, okay, we are fully focused on answering this question of what the hell is going on, and digging into it and trying to troubleshoot it, because that's, just being in R&D, we just didn't know. We didn't know what was the cause of the issue, and thus could not diagnose what the solution would be and how big of an issue it was. I mean, it was clearly enough of a showstopper for us to kind of orient fully around it as a company. So that lasted for about a month of being in that. So it was very painful and stressful during that time. It was a time of high ambiguity and very high pressure to figure it out and get out of it. And so we ended up kind of laying out as a team. We kind of developed a very team-driven culture here. And so laid out potential scenarios that we could take. And then it was fundamentally, so that was kind of as a team we did that, and then said it was fundamentally for the board and the founding team to kind of say, okay, this is no longer an engineering question. These are kind of, the engineers said, these are the kind of the risks and benefits of these different ones. But fundamentally it came down to more of a business strategy. And that pushed the decision up to the board and us. And so we ended up making the call to go down a path that was riskier. It had higher risk and higher reward. And we made that decision very conscious that this could be the outcome, which is we are shutting down the project because we went into we ended up in the high risk bucket and not the reward. But for our team, that was actually quite nice. We had some engineers who were very stressed out during that time. But after we made the decision, it was this aspect, one of our engineers used the phrase, well, the die is cast. And so, yeah, we know we're working towards this, but we may fail, and that's okay. We've kind of made this decision, and we're going to do our best to make it successful. And so I think it actually removed a lot of stress in having, James and I didn't come in and saying, this is how we're making this decision. It was like it was a crazy time that this kind of evolved out of it. But in that hierarchy between what are the questions that the engineering team is equipped to answer, and then what are the questions that the board should. And so kind of orienting decisions around questions in that way was actually quite helpful in coming to a place. And then we wrote up like a very lengthy report that everyone could read and comment on. And so we had kind of alignment of the team. So that was kind of what allowed us to get through that. But until this past couple of months, that was the hardest time that we had faced as a company. With getting through it. In some ways, this was easier because even though we ended up not working, it wasn't an existential question. The die had been cast. And so we were going to play it out. And that decision had been made, which removed some of the ambiguity from it, even if it meant that we were increasingly looking at, just getting closer and closer to a wall. So yeah, that's how we ended up making it.
Yeah, you had shared this concept of name it to tame it in one of our group meetings, and you mentioned that this period that back in is the summer of 2018, this in the woods period that you called it. You said it was about 1 month. Did you decide going into the woods like this is a 1 month period ahead of time? Like, hey guys, team, we're going to spend 1 month trying to figure out what questions we need to be asking? Or did you walk into this period of in the woods not knowing how long you were going to be in the woods? Did you sort of like preordain, okay, we're going to take 4 weeks to do this, and then at the end, the other side, then we're going to make a new decision?
I wish we had. No, it was much more like, we don't know what's going on, so we're going to scrap all of the existing structure or put them on hold, the existing structures around meetings. And, we operate in an agile system, so our daily stand-ups and Scrum. And instead, it's like we're meeting every day. Because we're always going to be uncovering new information. Like, we need to very clearly show how we're documenting this new information, keep a consistent log of the things that we, what we believe based upon what we've seen, and really just orchestrate so we can go in lockstep, because we didn't know how long it was going to take us to get to that answer, and then kind of be able to assign work and tasks based upon that new information that would come in. So we didn't know how long it was going to take. So it ended up working out, and that we kind of were able to, by taking an approach that like there was a ton of really long meetings, and that like was definitely not the most efficient way we could have done it. But I think we did know that we needed some way to organize around a pretty consistent flow of new and very critical information, and then decide upon what is the right work to be done from here and the right next questions to ask. And have a system to keep that all in check. And it was difficult. It was, we also at the time were kind of wrestling and doing a lot of discovery around our own team culture and things like that. Ended up having some folks that didn't fit as well with that. So that helped us clarify in that process kind of through pain as well.
Well, you said something there where you said maybe it wasn't the most efficient way possible to get to that point. Like, I don't know if there is an efficient way to do it, right? I mean, I think from an engineering standpoint, like from the engineer mindset, you're like, okay, like I wish we could like just calibrate this thing and just make a decision quickly. The type of decision you were trying to make just maybe couldn't be made quickly.
Not with the information that we had at the time. It's like easy to look back now, having the answer, been like, oh, we should have seen that all along. It's like a murder mystery or something like that. Like right. The clue was there the whole time. That actually is kind of an interesting analogy for that period of time. It's like we were a group of detectives on a case and how we organized it. So I think you're correct in that. I think if we went through it again, it kind of being in the woods, it did get us a lot more comfortable and better practiced at dealing with unexpected unknowns, even though it's never fun, but we built up some muscle memory on that.
And so the 4-week period, or the month that it took you from the time you decided to go into the woods or go in the woods, what made you feel like you had collected enough information and data to exit out of that phase, that in the woods phase?
A few things. We had built a hypothesis of what the problem was, and we had constructed the experiments, which is kind of scientific process, constructed the experiments to validate that what we thought was the issue. And when we got enough conviction that when that was the case, that also happened to align with us. We try to do a lot of kind of networking in the sensor space, and ended up talking with a group that had done some similar research. And kind of in talking with them, it validated our hypothesis. So it was kind of based upon that we're saying, okay, we believe we know what the problem is. And at the same time, we also did a very deep dive into the research as an entire team. And so kind of aligned on like, what is every solution out there for this problem? And so it was with that we had enough information to kind of concoct those scenarios, kind of like plan A, plan B, plan C. Mm-hmm. And so it was with that it made sense of that we could kick the decision to the board itself.
Got it. And so I'm curious about the other sensor company that you said you spoke with. How did you come to meet with them? Was that like, did you know they existed? You said, I was just going to give them a call. Was it iterative and that we talked to this person who said we should talk to this person who said we should talk to that person?
It was iterative. They're like a small sensor research team that we had like met through I believe it was through one of the companies we got our chemistries from for the sensor. And that we also, I think maybe with some Googling as well, we saw that they were trying a similar approach to the one we were considering, one of the options. And so I think it was a cold reach out, and they were very gracious. They like spoke to our team for like an hour and a half, not charging. We sent them a very nice thank you gift. So yeah, that was very helpful. It was luck, but we did the groundwork to put ourselves in a position to be able to benefit from it.
If I heard you correctly, that sounds like they were a potential competitor, though.
No, they weren't in the same space. They were looking at just how do you use cameras as an optical sensor in general. So it was kind of like in some ways the same umbrella, but no, they were very far from a direct competitor.
Okay, got it. So they were doing sensors and sensor research, but not specifically for the problem that you were out to solve.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. And they weren't building things to sell. I think they were a consultancy that other firms would hire them to do types of research.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. So then you're coming out of the woods. You said you went in with some hypotheses around plan A, plan B, plan C. And then coming out of there, you felt like we'd done enough time in the lab, so to speak, to feel at least reasonably comfortable on the next phase. So we're going to make this adjustment. We're going to move in this new direction. And that's going to suck because we'll have to refactor the platform and do all these different things. But at that point, you said the die is cast. Everybody feels like no matter how hard this might be, at least we know what we have up ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. And the team doesn't feel like they are holding the decision of the direction of the company. That's
Tell me more about that.
Like kind of thinking about maybe like methods and outcomes, which is a way I also like to break down problems. So we had a broad kind of company-wide outcome of let's make a sensor system that is affordable and easy to maintain that is built for aquaculture. And so the method we choose to get there could be a variety of ways. And we essentially, as a business team and as the board, decided strategically what was going to be our best option. And so like one of the things we considered was like just working with an OEM provider. And like one of the decision points against that was that even if we were successful, it would lead us with very little in terms of assets as a company. It would really need to accelerate our revenue timeline, which in selling, we were selling to an international clientele, which means we would just have to move really fast on that end. And we saw that as riskier and potentially lower reward because of it. So it was things like that helped make that decision. And being able to also very clearly express that and why we made the decision to the team, that removed the needing to think on those factors from anyone else. So it was saying, this is the direction we're going. How exactly we're going to get there is unclear. And here's a rough guideline. And so it's building the playing field almost, and what the goal is and how long. And so you're going to make it or you're going to not, which I think removes some potential anxiety versus it being kind of this open box where you're consistently, there's almost like a void or vacuum of leadership in which other people might feel like they need to step forward and into it, of being like, have you considered these other things? And so this is a way of saying, yes, we've considered those other things. They're good things to consider. Here is our rationale for not pursuing that. So within that, that kind of allowed our team to be able to operate in a way that was highly aligned and quite effective. We didn't get there because it's just a really hard problem to solve.
Sure.
Yeah. So if that answer makes sense, that's how we.
It does. Yeah. Like I use the analogy of like the playing field, as much as I'm averse to using sports analogies in business because everybody does it. I think it's an easy one in this case to say, look, here's the game, right? Here's the outcome of the game. We want to win this game. We've designed the game. Here's the field. You're the players. These are the rules. If you want to play this game and get this outcome, here's how this is going to work. If you want to play a different game, if you want to play soccer instead of kickball, well, then that's fine. That's a different game. But this is our game. So when you show up to the office every day, be ready to play kickball because that's the game we're playing. And then there's no ambiguity about like, oh, I'm going to show up to work today. Today, should we play soccer or should we play volleyball or should we play golf? Like, no, we're playing kickball today.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a really important piece of that is to say very clearly, this is why we're playing kickball and not soccer. We've considered it. This is the rationale for it. So you don't have to worry about, are you showing up in the right cleats beat this analogy to death. You really feel held in that way, which I think is really important as a board and as leadership, is to do that. And that's kind of it's that level of decision making that we found it's really helpful to bring our team and all of our employees into problems, but also making it really clear which decisions are theirs to make and which not, while giving room for input. It's almost like, I'm not a parent, so I can't give this analogy fully, but you are. There's some way of saying like, yeah, I'm going to have room for input, but fundamentally I'm going to make this decision at the end. And so, and that's just how it's going to go. And so especially creating culture in which people really feel heard. There's another maxim that we use kind of a cultural value, which we say it's only a value if you literally say it a lot. So it's not up on a wall. So we say this phrase a lot, which is, what I'm hearing you say is. And so as a response to someone, because we found, and you do a good job of this, it's actually much more efficient, and that people do not need to be right, but everyone needs to be heard. So much time is wasted in meetings and in discussions, especially emotional discussions, by people repeating themselves because in slightly different ways, because they don't feel heard. And so saying that phrase, what I'm hearing you say is, and so I think that extends broadly to kind of how we approach leadership, which is everyone really needs to feel heard, and not in a bullshit way. Like you actually listen and take it into consideration and have, let it influence your opinion one way or another. But it's really important that people feel heard. And so that was really critical of us to be able to say, like, we're playing kickball and here is why. And in ways that addresses, like, some people think we should be playing soccer and we're making the decision to play kickball and here's why. And it's not just railroading you. Like, we've really thought about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that a lot, not just because it expresses a maxim or a value that you have, but when you have a lot of really smart people that are highly creative and dedicated to solving the problem, you're going to naturally have a lot of different ideas about that. And when it's a problem in itself that's never been solved before, so there really isn't a clear model on which to base the solution, now you have just, even when you have an idea, there's going to be a lot of individual ambiguity around, a lot of ambiguity for each individual around their idea. So if you have 10 engineers in a room and they're saying, well, I think we should try this, and somebody else says, I think we should try that. Well, just by that process of saying, well, what I'm hearing you say is, it forces clarity of this almost like intellectual telepathy. Like, I'm an engineer and I think we should solve it this way. And I think I'm expressing it to you clearly, and I think that you understand it. And if all you do is listen to it, and instead of playing it back and say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is this, then it forces us to agree that we are both understanding the same thing that I'm trying to communicate.
Yes, exactly. It's we spent a lot of time in this because we had a lot of trouble with meetings feeling really stressful and kind of emotionally laden. And James he very much had this aspiration of that when we are working in the idea space, it should be like battle bots. Like, we are just sending our little robot into it, and it might lose. It might be the weaker battle bot, but we're actually not attached to ours winning. The whole point is actually to get it better in that space. And so if it's easy for people, for kind of emotions to creep into that. It's hard to keep that kind of that purity in some ways. And we read a number of books on this. I think just the Patrick Lencioni books generally were so key for us of being able to create that culture in which it really felt like it truly collaborative in that way, that battle of ideas, because it's the cheapest way you can talk is cheap. And so if you can uncover an issue in the idea space, that is by far the cheapest place to do it than anywhere else when you actually start building it. And so, there's lots of talks about this, like groupthink and things like that. So we had fallen into a number of those holes. We actually had to change our team because of it, to be able to have a team that was really aligned around that value of being able to participate in the idea space. And then it takes a lot of work. It was a lot of upkeep, doing retrospectives regularly to kind of just make sure that the team was well equipped to make those decisions and explore together on what work needs to come next.
Yeah, you mentioned Patrick Lencioni.
Lencioni. Yeah.
Lencioni. I always have a hard time with his name. One of the books that I know you shared this in one of our group CEO Elevate group conversations was the 5 dysfunctions of team. I remember you were very high about this particular book that you shared with everyone else, all the other CEOs in the group. So what was it about that book in particular that you felt like was useful in developing and rebuilding this whole new plan that you're going through?
Yeah, we have a few books that kind of became canon for us. And it was After the Woods when James and I had looked at each other and were like, we need to stop thinking that we actually know what we're doing and just start innovate in a very narrow space, which is the sensor space. And aside from that, let's go out and learn as much as we can. So we both love audiobooks. And so we just went on a total binge together. And so this was one of the books that was recommended to us, and we ended up reading a lot from him. And so the thesis of this book is basically that teamwork is one of the most valuable things you can have as a company, effective teamwork, and that it is very underinvested in. And so they, in a very clear way, lay out what are these 5 dysfunctions and how they stack on each other. And then we actually bought, there's a follow-up guide which lays out a 2-day offsite. So we actually just bought that and had the whole team read it. And so we went through all of the exercises. And so it is incredibly powerful. Like one of them, for example, which, for some organizations, I've told them, they're like, oh my God, I could not imagine doing that. Where you have everyone in the room on a given team. So it's very important that it is a single team that works together regularly. So actually, I didn't participate in these because I'm not on the engineering team, but our engineering team did. And you go and you answer the question is, for each other person on the team, what is the number one way this person contributes positively to the team dynamic? And then what is the number way that this person contributes negatively to the team dynamic? And then you sit in a room and you start with the leader of the team. So we started with James, and everyone ran around and read their positive, and then everyone went around and read their negative. So it's powerful. And then you go around, you do it for every single member. And so it's things like that where you're building up a lot of trust. And it's vulnerability, and trust is what you need in order to have an effective team in that space, because we as humans are prone to many biases. But one of them, we are very prone to, when someone makes a mistake or does something that is unexpected, we are prone to say that it's because they're a certain way. Like, oh, Scott is late for my call because he's just lazy, or he's not very good with time. And when we make a mistake, we're like, oh, I'm late for the call because I'm like just really busy. I'm like, closing down my company. Like I've got shit going on. And so for ourselves, we say it's behaviors, but for others, we say it's character. It's the fundamental attribution error. And so that is death to a team. And so it's how do you build up other cycles and systems to undo that and keep the team as far away from that as possible. I cannot recommend that book more for anyone who is working, even in a partnership, in a company where it's not well defined, or it's very well defined. You will save a lot of time and money, and it's the type of thing. It's kind of like, it's similar to what I'm hearing you say is, in that it takes more time to repeat and confirm that you understood what someone is saying, but you save way more time in the long run because you're not having people repeat themselves over and over. So it's the same thing here. You operate far more efficiently by taking that investment. So yeah, that book was crucial. I mean, I still refer to it a lot. And we've actually ended up running that exercise 3 more times and kind of updating them for everyone. So it's like really building that muscle of, it's like, if we have this shared goal of improvement and you and I have a lot of trust in each other, I trust that, you like me and that like we are working in the same direction, then feedback from you is actually just really useful. In it being really direct and about not my technical abilities or something like that, but just about myself as a team member.
You got me thinking that I should do this with my wife and my son. I mean, it's just like, it's human relationships, right? It's not just about work.
Yes.
But we spend more time at work than we do at home in most cases, especially in a startup world. And so this ultimate transparency, it reminds me in some ways of Ray Dalio with his book Principles and how he runs Bridgewater Associates. It's a hedge fund. It's just like everything is wide open, very open feedback all of the time. It can be scary to put yourself in that position. Like, who wants to be criticized? And so by nature, what you do from a cultural standpoint is you only attract those people who are willing to engage in that process. Like we had there was a guy at Blend, at the lending software where I worked for a while, and we hired him from Bridgewater. And he told me about this. I was like, because I'd read the Principles book before it was a book. I just downloaded the PDF and I asked him about it. He said, it's very much like that. And he said, some people obviously have a very hard time with it and they just don't last long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's part of the point.
I mean, and that's one of the things that Ray Dalio did incredibly well. And this is another Lencioni book about values. I think it's called The Advantage, where Ray knew the core values of what it meant to work at Bridgewater and what their company stood for. And so they hired and tried to hire and test for what those values were. Because if you hire against that, you're just going to run into a lot of pain, which we had to make that mistake multiple times before we're like, okay, we need to actually figure out what we're doing. And so we have those much better outlined now and can build tests into our hiring process to really identify hotspots with that. So it's like in hiring some of our software engineers, we actually had some questions. And so we just directly asked the references about those specific areas and those attributes with them and for examples and things like that. So it actually allowed us to say yes to some hires that we weren't sure about because we had really zeroed in on that.
And were there any false positives that you ended up excluding?
Probably. Yeah.
Just speaking about getting all the way down to the reference check where you thought, okay, we're pretty high on this person. And now we're going to call a reference, ask the direct questions of the reference. And now that we're hearing from the reference, like, oh, maybe we're not going to hire this person.
Yeah. Another book we read was when we overhauled our hiring practice. So we only did this twice. So I haven't had a huge amount of experience with it, but we're going to continue it. It's really important to have a scorecard that all the people that are involved in the hiring process are figuring out, are filing. And if someone doesn't get beyond a certain score, then they don't go through. And it's also, that was like where the hotspots were identified and things like that. So because, references often want to say good things in that regard. Yeah. Another great interviewing question too is saying, okay, when I ask this about this reference, what are they going to tell me? So asking the interviewee and being really specific, making it very clear you're going to ask their former boss about this time. It's a good way to get some audit, some potentially very candid feedback because they know you're going to check on them in the interview itself.
That's interesting. Well, I'm right now rereading probably for like the 5th time Essentialism by Greg McKeown. And in his book, he talks about a process where they were reviewing applicants for a graduate program. And he said they were really getting hung up on the 7s and 8s out of 10. Like they had the scorecard system, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what do we do with these 7s and 8s? Or like, do we let them in? Who gets in? Who doesn't? And finally, they just decided, well, if they're 7 or 8, they're not good enough. They need to be at least a 9 or a 10 out of 10. And so he talks about this principle of 90%. They need to be at least 90%. And so just being very decisive around that scorecard and saying, like, this is the way it is. If you could hit all these other stuff, other factors, but if you're 89.5, that's not 90%. So you don't get in. And that actually relieves a lot of the pain and frustration. And because if it's 89.5, then it's 89. If it's 89, then it's 88. If it's 88, it's 87. You just like draw a line.
And there's some way with that, like the die is cast. You have built a system. you spent the hard part. There's also just a part of decision making of like, how do you spend the emotional energy to build the system and also have a way of tweaking it, so doing retrospectives to improve. But then once you're actually operating it, you're oh, well, it's an 89.5 that doesn't pass. You're not also at the same time being like, oh, should an 89.5 pass? Like, how will that have this implication for other people? Like, it's like you could say, okay, like, let's bring that up in the retro. But the rule we set is that if it's not a 90, we don't go forward. And so that's what we're going to do. And maybe that was the wrong decision. So there's also that aspect of like retrospectives being really important of a way of structuring, improving the decision making and the system in the future, but separating the actual the operation of it from the building the system. Yeah,
the one decision saves 1,000 down the road. Like I did this on a personal level back early part of November. So I signed up for another ultra marathon I'm doing in February. So I'm in training, and thank you. Take that as a compliment. And so probably the hardest part about training for this particular race is the time of year, because it's winter, first of all, which sucks. So it's always rainy and it's always cold. And secondly, it's holiday season, which I love holiday season I love to eat, and I don't drink a lot of alcohol. Like I'll drink some wine, like a glass of wine or two. I'll have a beer or two. But back in early November, my parents came to visit for a weekend, and we went out, we had a couple beers, and I woke up the next morning not feeling great. Like I had like 2 beers, but I was just kind of tired. It's a Friday night. Should be a night where I get good rest because I'm busy the rest of the week. And I just decided, I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to drink a drop of alcohol until after the race is over. And like, even my friends are like, yeah, but it's not like you have a drinking problem. And I said, but that's not the point. The point is I'm going to be going to Christmas parties and holiday parties and this thing and that thing. And it's like, if I just walk in knowing I don't have to make a decision about whether or not I'm going to have a glass of wine or not, or 1 or 2, or do I have beer tonight? Or there's some special drink, because eggnog with rum, and like maybe I'll try that. It's just like one decision. It sucked over. I'll tell you flat out. I wanted red wine with my Thanksgiving turkey. We had 13 people in my house last night, friends from 15 years of my life in the house with bottles of wine, and I'm sitting there at dinner like, that wine looks pretty damn good. But I had decided, like, I am not having any alcohol. And it's like, that is a certain amount of freedom. Jocko Willing talks about this, like discipline equals freedom, right? Make one decision. This is the way it is. Now, afterwards, I can decide next race, maybe I'll, open up a little bit and let myself have a beer a month or something. But for now, this is the decision because I just felt like I needed to do it.
Yeah, you made a very clear decision. It's very easy to follow. And you also built the retrospective into it after the race. This is not you committing to an alcohol-free life for the rest of your life. It's an easier decision to make. You have a set goal with it. You know when it's going to end. And it's yes or no. Yeah, I actually had a similar experience. I have a heart disease in my family. And so I've just turned 30 and I got my cholesterol checked. And the doctor was like, you need to lose a little weight. And so I was like, all right, what's something that's like just really easy that I could do? And I just cut wheat out of my diet, like from bread, wheat. And I've lost 1 pound a week. Like I still eat well. I enjoy food. It's just, if it has wheat in it, I don't eat it. I don't drink beer. And it's totally worked.
Yeah. One decision saves a lot of other decisions down the road. It's like, I'm just not going to eat anything. Like I've heard the same with diets, like just don't eat white stuff, bread, pasta, sugar. Like if you don't eat stuff that's white, you're going to lose weight. So like something simple is incremental can definitely help, and just sticking to the rule. And it's not it's a simple rule. It's not easy because it's tempting and it smells good. And I'm like, a glass of wine would be great. Or my wife and I went out to dinner Friday night and I was like, wow, they have a really good IPA. But, can't have it.
Yeah. There was a habits book that I read, and same with my co-founder recently, which is something really stuck with me about it. They said the way to make or break a habit is not necessarily setting all right, I'm going to try not to eat wheat. But it's actually to change your belief about yourself with it. And so something like that of like, I bit my nails a lot and I was like, to stop. So I said, all right, I'm going to try and change my belief about myself that I am someone who cares about having beautiful nails. And so I bought myself a nail file kit, and I still am picking at my cuticles, but I don't bite my nails anymore. So I think there's something in that aspect of, in terms of decision making and being able to commit to something, of it's what do you say about yourself, which is, and I think it's also it's all of this ties into it's the same systems for an organization of how do you make those. It's how do you build the playing field? How do you build it in a way that people feel like they've been heard in the process, and that there's also a way for feedback to come back that's not permanent. But there is a structured way for feedback to come back into it. So that retrospective after the race, going to reevaluate where I'm at, how I've been feeling, and then you play and you go. Mm-hmm. And so it's decision, play, reevaluate, and keep going. Life and in business.
Yeah, absolutely. Build, measure, learn. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So just maybe take a couple of minutes to wrap up here, and thank you for pulling us out of the weeds there a little bit and getting us back into organizational structure and decision making. So now that you went, you obviously went through this, the die is cast. You went through the woods. You came out of the woods. The die is cast. The wall got closer, and you realized, okay, I can either raise more money and do so maybe potentially disingenuously, or not at least fully believing, not disingenuous, but just like not fully believing that we could maximize on this capital, and then also knowing that the technical hurdles were extremely difficult, right? So you said that took about a month to go into that and out of that. Was that also unknown how long it was going to take, or did you just say, like, we're done with this project and it's going to take a little bit of time to unfold it?
Yeah, that was less of an all-team decision because it was on the fundraising side. That was really just me alone, seeing how that was going. And then on the R&D side, it's that interesting thing of, like, in the world of fundraising and startups, it's hard to have definitive answers. It's like, and we're still in that. Like, our product could work. It could have worked the next day. We just believe that was very unlikely, but there could have been something that, something can happen. And so you're just essentially just making a bet on predictions. And this is not directly to decisions, but like one of the things was us thinking about how it was both very courageous to continue with this commitment, but also courageous to stop, because that took a lot of effort. In terms of making that decision, it was hard. It began kind of with me this time, and seeing where we were, and also hearing about kind of the feedback from the investment community on where we were. And then I was bringing the board in, and then fundamentally the full team on where we were. It made it even easier. We were getting ready for a very large data push. And then on the first day of doing it, ran into a huge unexpected wall. And I was like, well, okay, that seems like a sign. We were pretty close to making the call at that point, but that kind of put it over the edge for us. This was kind of maybe a little bit similar to the woods in that it was a bit day by day. And we did some orienting around it. We took a lot of walks, brainstorming, and kind of wanted to get to a point of how would we gather the data that we needed to make the decision, and what questions did we need to answer. And so some of those were, do we have interest from the types of funders that we want, and interest that we believe with high certainty could convert? And then also, do we believe that we could deliver technically upon this timeline that we're committing to from the interest? And we had, on the first answer, we had some of it. And on the second one, that's what really pushed us to the point of, like, we actually no longer believe that's the case with what we've learned over this process. And it was unexpected. We didn't think that was going to happen. So
you felt like you could have raised and gotten, the right investors to invest in you, but the premise on that raise would have been based on some kind of unrealistic timeline for delivering.
Yeah, it would have been based on outdated information at that point, based upon kind of what we knew and what we had seen. And so there is, like in enterprise selling, you want to be selling the future and the positives and the excitement and the hope. But we kind of in facing that, and there's also an interesting process of decision making, just something I think is maybe a little bit unique to entrepreneurship, is the kind of fake it till you make it approach, and that your drive to have this become reality is really the only thing that's going to make it become reality. And so in some ways that's very powerful, because it could push you to do kind of things you wouldn't do if you knew how long and hard it was going to be and the amount of pain you'd have to go through. But on the other side can cloud your decision making, because I know that we felt a lot of pressure that we have to hold the optimism and hold that, and maybe that can do some clouding on where we actually are and what is actually in front of us. And so turns out we were pretty good at that. And I think that both got us to where we are and also helped us maybe blind us from some important data that we were missing.
Yeah. Well, when we spoke last week and you shared the news with me, one of the first things I said to you is congratulations on the decision, because one of the things I remember saying and thinking was like the entrepreneur that continues to persevere and the entrepreneur that decides like now's the time to shift or quit, you're dealing with the same data. It's just a matter of how you interpret it and what you want to do with it. I wrote a post. I've had my own failed startup back in like 2007, 2006 that I shut down. And one of my biggest lessons is like, I wish I would have shut it down a year before. Like, I wish I would have quit before I persevered another year and went another round of capital and took in all the more pain, because I wanted it to be successful. But just because I wanted it to be successful doesn't mean it was going to be successful. So knowing when to quit is, I think, just as important as knowing when to persevere. And especially in a situation where you still have some cash in the bank, you've got a great relationship with investors and you can still do something remarkable with it.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. And I don't know what the answer is, but it was just an interesting realization that the rose-colored glasses that in some ways you have to wear, how do you build systems around those to, maybe not see the shit, but like see what you might be missing, which I think is, again, a lot of the systems you build around decision-making is understanding what biases do we have as humans. When am I going to be irrational, and what systems can I build when I am rational to help me avoid making an irrational decision? So I don't know what the answer is on that kind of fake it till you make it idea, but I'm sure a lot of people have thought about it.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, you started off by saying that you're a very genuine, real, and hopeful person. And I absolutely get attest to that. I appreciate it. Our friendship more than anything. Definitely appreciate this conversation, both personally, professionally, and thirdly, also intellectually. I think this has been it's been a lot of fun for me just to talk to you and spend time with you. Anytime it's fun to spend time with you, but I'm really happy for you that you've been able to get to this point. And I know it's been hard, and I read that email and I could tell just looking at you that it was a hard thing to write, a hard thing to deliver. But based on everything you shared last week, I wholeheartedly know this is the right decision for you, and know you're going to come out on top either way.
Thanks, man. Super appreciate that. It's been a real, like, one of the best educations I've gotten is in working with you, and both in seeing not just the lessons you've taught, but also just the ways of how important it is to show yourself in these relationships and what that's built. And so kind of on that note of friendship, and that has been, I feel very lucky in that regard, and I'm excited to continue it wherever that goes. And I was really grateful. This is my first podcast, so I hope it was good.
Well, it won't be your last. It was good. And you can use it for recruiting your next team. If people want to know what's it like to work with you, you're like, hey, here's a couple things.
That's actually a great podcast. Yeah. Wow. Thanks. Well, let me know if you want me on again.
What's that now? Say that again.
Let me know if you want me on again.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll make it a regular thing.
Perfect.
For sure. Well, you've been also very generous to the other teams in the group. I know many of the other CEOs have benefited from your advice around investing and working with investors and pitches and team building. So you're a good dude. I'm really glad to have you in my inner circle. So if you're able to talk at all about your new project, if you want to share a couple of details or where people, maybe it's too early, but if you want to share some, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Maybe this will go out to all of my fellow sales quality entrepreneurs out there. This is me pitching you as a potential customer. Pivot into B2C, baby.
We'll just share it with the world. Don't worry about just sharing with our group.
Yeah. So we, my co-founder and I have always been driven by impact, and a lot of it on environmental impact. And so we are excited to explore climate change much more directly than we had been. We are still ideating on exactly what we're going to do, but the question that we're looking to answer is when you see that notification on your phone and you see the media is finally doing a good job of covering how scary climate change is, how present it is here, and how scary the future of it is, that you as an individual seeing that, you're left with the feeling of, well, what can I do? And so that's the question that we want to work on answering, because there's a lot that you can do. And it's pretty easy, and we want to be able to be that bridge between what's out there and what's possible, and really help facilitate that and fundamentally build a platform, a group of people that are oriented around hope and action in the efforts to address climate change. So one person at a time. Much more to come. We're going to be taking the first couple of weeks of January off for a much needed rest, but then we're going to get started, hopefully launching in Q2 of 2020.
Cool. I'm looking forward to it. So keep us posted on how that develops. You definitely have a fan here. I'm always thinking every day, everything from, plastic bottles and avoiding eating, drinking stuff out of those to, every once in a while riding my bike when I don't need to jump in a car. I mean, it's like a little basic stuff, but I always wonder, does it really make a difference?
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the questions that we want to be working in the space of, and how can we do things around quantification, and if the more people that we can get working together on this, we can have a pretty significant impact. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's not being picked. So let's go.
Cool. I love it. Well, listen, Zach, thank you for being so generous with your time today. And look, man, if there's anything I can do to help you out, of course, let me know. And as soon as this publishes, we'll share a link to the recording. You can share it with your tribe, your people, whatever it is, the recruiting that you're going to be doing for the future team on how Zach and James run their operations. And thanks for being so generous with your perspectives and something that is obviously very personal to you.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for having me on. Really looking forward to continuing the conversation.
All right, man. Have a good rest of the day. We'll talk soon. See you, Zach.
See you, Scott.
All right. Bye. All right, folks, that's a wrap. That is my conversation with Zach Stein, formerly co-founder of Osmo Systems. And so, like I said at the top of the episode, Zach has been somebody who I've worked with, obviously, as a client, but also as a person, as an individual, as a friend. He's somebody I've just come to grow the amount of trust and relationship that I've had with him over the last couple of years. I've seen him be selfless time and time again with the other CEOs in our group. Anything around how do you run your team, problems to solve in the organization, working with investors. He just has always been so generous, and doing so at a time where, just like a lot of you, he's running a startup, managing a team, trying to raise capital, and he constantly always made time for other people. And even today with the podcast, going through a retrospective of something that is very new and very painful. But he was, when he and I talked last week, he shared the news that he was winding things down and talking through his decision process. I think about a day or two later, I shot him a quick note. I said, listen, I know it's just happening, but if you'd be willing to share, your process and what you went through, I think it would be really beneficial to everybody who listens to this podcast, so we can get this message out to as many people as possible. And he just immediately is like, oh, dude, I would love to do that. So it's just the kind of guy that he is. So I'm really grateful to know him personally, professionally, and to have him here on the show. So if you reach this point of the podcast, thank you so much for listening to this particular episode of the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. If you haven't already, please go over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, wherever you're listening to this podcast. Please leave a review, leave a rating. Let us know how we're doing, how we can make things even better. We pay attention to those, and so do those platforms. Those platforms look at those reviews as a way to recommend our show to other people just like you. So please do leave a review. Let us know how we're doing, and then also share the episode. If you think this particular episode was useful or would be useful for a friend of yours, just flick them a message and say, hey, just listen to this interview with Zach Stein. I think you should check it out, because word of mouth is still the best way. Viral is still the best way to get the word out about this podcast or any podcast. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening to the Startup Selling Show, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci, and we'll do it again soon. Thanks.